"It wasn't me. For God's sake, I didn't do it." The desperate cry of the elderly woman, Donna Ilara, echoed through the courtroom, her trembling voice failing as tears streamed down her wrinkled face. The accusation of murdering her young neighbor, Lucas, weighed like a tombstone, and the verdict seemed sealed. Cold sweat trickled down Judge Helena's forehead, the gavel poised to fall. But what no one expected was that the smallest of witnesses, a silent green parrot, held the deadliest secret. Donna Ilara's cry reverberated, a lament that seemed to tear the fabric of that solemn room. Her tear-filled eyes fixed on Judge Helena, who, though maintaining an expression of unwavering seriousness, felt a shiver run down her spine. The gavel, once suspended, now rested on the table, a silent weight awaiting the moment to seal the woman's fate. The courtroom plunged into a heavy silence, broken only by Ilara's stifled sob and the rustling of papers. In that instant, Judge Helena allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. The image of Donna Ilara, so petite and stooped, contrasted violently with the gravity of the accusation. How could such a fragile woman be capable of such an act? This question echoed in her mind, even as the logic of the prosecution's case asserted itself. The circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. Neighborhood disputes, witnesses describing her as reclusive and irritable, and the absence of a solid alibi. Everything seemed to conspire against her. Donna Ilara, in turn, felt her world collapsing. Every suspicious glance, every murmur in the audience was a stab to her fragile heart. She looked to the corner of the room, where Luro, her green-feathered parrot with curious eyes, sat in his cage, covered by a thin cloth. He was the only creature who understood her, her silent confidant, the link to the joy Lucas had brought her. The improbable friendship between the elderly woman and the young neighbor, a balm in her solitude, was now distorted and used as a motive for a crime she would never commit. The prosecutor, Dr. Mendez, a woman with an austere demeanor and a sharp voice, resumed speaking. "Your Honor, with all due respect, the defendant's emotion cannot obscure the facts. The evidence is clear. Donna Ilara had motive, access, and no plausible explanation for her conduct." She gestured towards the stacked documents, each page a fragment of Ilara's life turned into a weapon against her. Ilara closed her eyes, feeling suffocated. The prosecutor's words were like stones thrown at her soul. She remembered the days when Lucas visited her, bringing a smile and stories. He always brought a treat for Luro, and the parrot, usually quiet, seemed to have a special affection for Lucas. They laughed together, Lucas and she, at Luro's funny imitations, who repeated nonsensical phrases in Ilara's voice or that of TV characters. It was a pure, disinterested connection, now painted as something dark and possessive. Judge Helena observed the scene, her gaze sweeping the courtroom. She saw the genuine pain in Ilara's eyes, but also the coldness of the prosecution's arguments. The law demanded proof, and emotions could not dictate the verdict. She felt the weight of responsibility, the need to be fair, to see beyond appearances. An almost imperceptible sigh escaped her lips. The trial had dragged on for weeks, each day bringing new layers of despair. Ilara's hope, once a flickering flame, threatened to extinguish. The verdict approached, and with it, the shadow of a bleak future. She was a soul lost in a labyrinth of accusations, the exit ever more distant, obscured by the mist of injustice. She was a soul lost in a labyrinth of accusations, the exit ever more distant, obscured by the mist of injustice. Each day of the trial was a new wound, a cruel reminder of how her life had been turned upside down. Donna Ilara felt the weight of the audience's judging stares, each whisper a dagger in her chest. Her shoulders stooped even further, not just from age, but from the burden of a guilt that was not hers. Her hands, once agile for tending her garden and Luro, now trembled uncontrollably, clutching a damp handkerchief. The chilling fear of a future in prison, away from her home and her only companion, was a constant torment. Judge Helena, despite her firm and unwavering demeanor, could not ignore Ilara's evident fragility. Her eyes, trained to discern the truth amidst the confusion, caught the elderly woman's genuine affliction. But the law was clear, and the circumstantial evidence, masterfully presented by Prosecutor Mendez, painted a grim picture. Helena mentally reviewed the testimonies: the neighbor who spoke about Ilara's supposed envy of Lucas's youth, the gardener who mentioned an argument about music, small fragments innocent in themselves, but which together formed a convincing narrative of resentment. She sighed internally, the responsibility of her position weighing on her shoulders, how to balance human intuition with the coldness of justice. Ilara closed her eyes again, seeking refuge in memories of Lucas. He was a ray of sunshine in her solitary life. She remembered when he first knocked on her door, a wide smile, offering to help with groceries. From that day on, Lucas visited her regularly, bringing flowers from the garden or a treat for Luro. They talked for hours about trivialities and dreams. Lucas made her laugh, and her laughter, once rare, echoed through the house again. He was like a grandson she never had, and the idea that anyone could believe she would harm him was unspeakable torture. She missed his voice, his presence, his kindness. The murmur in the courtroom was a constant hum, a chorus of silent judgments. Ilara felt exposed, her intimate life dissected and distorted to fit the prosecution's narrative. With each witness who took the stand, a piece of her dignity seemed to be torn away. She looked at the cloth covering Luro's cage, her only solace, wondering if he felt her anguish. The parrot, who always brought lightness, was now just a green spot under the fabric, a mute reminder of all she had lost. Hope, stubbornly clinging to a thin thread, began to fade, replaced by a bitter resignation. The future seemed like a dark abyss, without light. Judge Helena observed the prosecutor, Dr. Mendez, who was now presenting the last pieces of circumstantial evidence, a forensic report indicating the presence of Ilara's footprints near the crime scene, though without conclusive proof of her involvement. It was a complex web with no murder weapon, no direct witnesses, just a tangle of clues that together seemed to suffocate the defendant, trapping her in a dead end. The seriousness on the judge's face deepened, her eyes scanning the room, searching for something that could alleviate that pressure. She knew that her decision would affect not only Donna Ilara's life, but also the community's perception of justice. The gavel, resting heavily in her hand, seemed to vibrate with the imminence of the verdict. Ilara's fate was about to be sealed, and Helena felt the weight of that moment crushing her own spirit, longing for a truth that went beyond appearances, that could dispel the mist of doubt. Judge Helena, with the gavel still resting in her hand, felt a subtle tremor run through her body. The pressure of that moment was almost palpable, a weight accumulating in her chest. Her eyes, previously fixed on the prosecutor, now turned to Donna Ilara, who seemed to shrink even further in her seat. The elderly woman, with stooped shoulders and a lost gaze, conveyed a vulnerability that painfully contrasted with the image of a cold, calculating killer. Helena searched in those tear-filled eyes for a hint of guilt, but found only deep sadness and a resignation that troubled her. Her intuition battled against the coldness of the facts. Dr. Mendez, noticing the judge's pause, cleared her throat. "Your Honor, the prosecution has concluded its presentation. The evidence is clear and compelling. We ask the jury to consider all the facts and reach a just verdict." Her voice was firm, unwavering, and each word seemed to further seal Ilara's fate. The audience murmured, some nodding in agreement, others with expressions of pity, but most with the certainty of guilt. The social weight of the trial crushed the elderly woman, who felt every gaze as a wound to her soul. Donna Ilara felt the air thin. Every murmur, every glance was a blow pushing her into the abyss. She clasped her hands, her nails digging into her palm, her hope disintegrating. The image of Lucas smiling with a bouquet of daisies flooded her mind. How could they think that she, who loved him like a son, would be capable of such cruelty? The injustice was an unbearable burden, crushing her. Judge Helena, in turn, felt a growing discomfort. The circumstantial evidence was strong, but something was missing. No confession, no murder weapon, no eyewitness. The prosecution had built a house of cards, but the foundation of the deep motive seemed fragile. Envy. An argument about music? These seemed like small motives for a brutal act. She looked at Leroux's cage, still covered, a point of mystery. Ilara, with superhuman effort, raised her gaze. Her eyes met the judge's for an instant, a silent plea, a mute cry of innocence. Helena felt the impact, a pang of doubt that refused to be ignored. She knew her role was to apply the law, but also to seek the truth, and the truth at that moment seemed shrouded in a dense fog. Mr. Carlos, the young public defense attorney, rose, his voice less imposing than the prosecutor's, but laden with sincerity. "Your Honor, members of the jury, the defense asks you to look beyond appearances. Donna Ilara is a good woman who found a friend in Lucas. The evidence is circumstantial, not conclusive. There is no direct proof connecting her to this crime. Where is the weapon? Where is the real motive?" Mr. Carlos continued, his voice gaining strength. "The friendship between Donna Ilara and Lucas was pure. To twist that into a motive for murder is a cruel distortion. Donna Ilara loved Lucas, the light in her life. We ask this jury not to be swayed by appearances, to look into this woman's heart, at her fragility. There is no hatred in her, only pain from loss and from the injustice of being accused." Judge Helena observed the jury, whose faces reflected weariness and seriousness. The scales of justice seemed to tip now one way, now the other, in a precarious balance. Ilara, with her eyes fixed on the floor, no longer had the strength to lift her head. Her fate, she felt, was sealed. The judge's gavel, which she now held firmly, seemed poised to fall, and with it, the sentence of a lifetime. Hope had transformed into a distant whisper. Hope had transformed into a distant whisper. The jury, with faces marked by seriousness and weariness, observed the room, their expressions a mosaic of reflection and judgment. Some had their brows furrowed in deep meditation, others fixed their gaze on Donna Ilara, as if trying to decipher the truth in her stooped and fragile figure. The silence that followed Mr. Carlos's words was not one of peace, but of a tense, almost suffocating expectation that hung in the air. Donna Ilara felt empty, as if all her emotions had been drained, leaving only a deep weariness and a dull ache in her chest. She dared not look at the jury, fearing to see in their eyes the condemnation she already felt weighing upon her. Judge Helena brought down the gavel with a soft sound, but one that echoed like thunder in Ilara's soul. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the court will now recess for you to deliberate. I ask you to consider all the evidence presented, the testimonies of the witnesses, and the arguments of the prosecution and defense with the utmost seriousness and impartiality. Remember that justice must prevail." Her voice was firm and resonated with authority, but her eyes cast a last glance at Ilara, a mix of duty and a pang of compassion she couldn't entirely conceal. As the jury filed out, a low, contained murmur filled the room, like a distant hum. Donna Ilara felt her legs give way, threatening to buckle under the weight of her own body and the situation. Mr. Carlos, with a gentle gesture and an expression of support, helped her sit back down in her seat. He squeezed her hand, a silent support worth more than 1,000 words. "Have faith, Donna Ilara. The truth always finds a way, no matter how winding. but his words seemed distant, muffled by the buzzing in her ears and the fog of despair that enveloped her. The truth. She knew the truth, but how to make it heard by those who refused to listen? Helena observed the scene from her elevated bench, feeling the weight of the imminent decision. Ilara's fragility was undeniable, and the absence of conclusive proof directly linking her to the crime deeply troubled her. Justice could not be blind to humanity, she thought to herself. It could not ignore the intuition screaming within. But neither could she ignore the weight of the circumstantial evidence, which accumulated like a mountain. She wondered if there was something she had missed, some tiny detail that could change the course of that imminent fate. Her gaze fell upon Luro's cage, still covered by a thin cloth in the corner of the room. The parrot, who had been brought as a token of affection, but who had remained silent throughout the proceedings, was a strange and quiet presence, almost forgotten. Donna Ilara, with her eyes fixed on the covered cage, felt a solitary tear trickle down her wrinkled face, tracing a path of pain. Luro was her last link to Lucas, to the life she knew and which now seemed so distant. She remembered Lucas playing with the parrot, patiently teaching him new words and laughing at his funny imitations. "Luro, say good morning, Donna Ilara," he would say, and the parrot would repeat in his shrill voice, drawing smiles from both of them. These memories were a balm and a torture at the same time. If Luro could speak the truth, she thought, if he could tell what really happened that terrible day. But he was just an animal, a reflection of past voices, a mere bird, oblivious to the gravity of the human drama unfolding around him, but holding within him a piece of lost innocence. The wait for the verdict felt like an eternity. Each minute dragged on, heavy and agonizing, as if time had solidified and refused to advance. Ilara felt her heart beat erratically, a physical pain in her chest that radiated throughout her being, consuming her. The future, once a dark and uncertain abyss, now presented itself as a cold, dark cage, with invisible bars that already imprisoned her in her mind. The idea of spending her last years away from her home, without her garden, without Luro, was unbearable, a torment that consumed her from within. She closed her eyes, trying to push away the image of the cell, the smell of despair, and the overwhelming loneliness that awaited her. Meanwhile, Judge Helena retreated to her chambers, her mind in a whirlwind, unable to find peace. She reviewed the details, searching for a flaw, a gap that could justify the doubt gnawing at her. The complexity of the case, the absence of a strong and credible motive for Ilara, the lack of a murder weapon. All of this deeply troubled her. She wanted to believe in the elderly woman's innocence. She felt it in her gut. But her duty was to base her decision on the facts and evidence presented. The image of Ilara, so small and lost, was difficult to reconcile with the brutality of the crime. Helena felt a weight on her conscience, a premonition that something was terribly wrong, that the truth was still hidden, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself unexpectedly. Donna Ilara's fate, and perhaps the very essence of justice, depended on that approaching verdict. Judge Helena returned to the courtroom, her serious and thoughtful face reflecting the gravity of the moment. The jury was still deliberating, and the wait stretched on, weaving a web of anxiety that trapped everyone present. Ilara, sitting beside Mr. Carlos, felt each minute as an eternity, a torment that dragged on. Her hands trembled uncontrollably, and she pressed them against each other, seeking some solace in her own wrinkled, cold skin. The silence of the room was heavy, almost oppressive, interrupted only by the muffled sound of footsteps in the corridor and the relentless ticking of an invisible clock, which seemed to mock her anguish. She looked at Luro's cage, which remained covered by a thin cloth, a point of stillness amidst the whirlwind of emotions. The parrot, her faithful companion, seemed oblivious to everything, but Ilara wished with all the strength of her tired heart that he could understand her pain and somehow free her. Helena, in her elevated seat, observed the room with a perceptive gaze. She saw the nervousness etched on the faces of those present, the tension accumulating, dense as fog. Her own thoughts were a tangle of doubts and responsibilities, the absence of direct proof, Ilara's evident fragility, Mr. Carlos's silent conviction. All of this made her question whether justice was truly being served or if a terrible error was about to be committed. She had studied the case exhaustively, read every testimony, and analyzed every piece of evidence. But there was a missing piece, a void that no circumstantial evidence could fill. The image of Lucas, a vibrant young man full of life, and that of Ilara, an elderly woman who seemed to have lost the will to live, were two extremes that refused to fit the cold and calculating narrative of the prosecution. Donna Ilara closed her eyes again, and memories of Lucas flooded her with a bittersweet sweetness. The smell of wet earth he brought from her garden, the sound of his contagious laughter that filled the house, the way he always bent down to talk to Luro, as if the bird were a human being capable of understanding every word. "Luro, my friend, how's life?" he would say, and Luro, in his parrot voice, would try to imitate with contagious enthusiasm. That time seemed like a distant dream, a paradise lost forever. Now she was there, accused of taking the life of the one she loved most, of the one who had brought color to her gray and solitary days. The pain of Lucas's loss mingled with the pain of injustice that suffocated her, creating an unbearable torment that seemed to tear her soul. She felt betrayed by the world, by those who judged her without knowing the truth of her pure heart. Mr. Carlos, perceiving Ilara's deep anguish, gently placed his hand on her stooped shoulder. "We're almost there, Donna Ilara. Keep hope. Please," he whispered, though his own voice carried an almost imperceptible note of uncertainty and weariness. Judge Helena, from afar, noticed the gesture of compassion. Human connection, even in an environment as formal and cold as that courtroom, was a reminder that behind titles and laws, there were people with feelings, stories, and fragilities. She wondered what the jury might be thinking at that moment, if they too felt this dissonance, this intuition that something didn't quite fit the presented narrative. The truth, she deeply believed, was like water, always finding a crack to emerge, no matter how much they tried to contain or hide it. Ilara opened her eyes and looked at Mr. Carlos, a gleam of gratitude and despair in her clouded and tear-filled gaze. He was a ray of kindness in her overwhelming darkness, but hope, for her, was a luxury she could no longer afford, a feeling that had vanished. The weight of judging stares, of unfounded accusations, had crushed her already fragile spirit. She felt small, insignificant, at the mercy of a system that seemed indifferent to her innocence and her pain. Judge Helena, in turn, felt the urgency of time, the ticking that seemed to accelerate. The jury would not be long in returning. That moment before the final storm was one of a tense, almost suffocating calm, foreshadowing the outcome. She clasped her fingers, feeling the cold, rough texture of the benchwood, and prayed silently for clarity, for a revelation that could dispel the darkness surrounding the case. Donna Ilara's fate was about to be sealed, and Helena felt that the truth, however hidden, could not remain silent forever, waiting for the right moment to manifest. Judge Helena felt that the truth, however hidden, could not remain silent forever, waiting for the right moment to manifest. The tension in the courtroom reached an unbearable point, a tight knot in Donna Ilara's chest. She felt her heart beat erratically, each beat an echo of her anguish. The silence was so dense that it seemed to crush the few who awaited the jury. The judge, with her hand on the bench, felt the same oppression, her eyes stopping at Luro's cage, the mute bird, an enigma. Ilara closed her eyes, tears streaming, imagining Lucas and the pain of his loss mingling with the unjust accusation. Suddenly, a subtle sound broke the silence. It was not a murmur nor a creak of a chair, but a low and uncertain chirp coming from the corner. All eyes turned to the cage. Mr. Carlos, beside Ilara, frowned. Ilara opened her eyes, a pang of surprise and a spark of hope igniting amidst the despair. Luro. He had never made such a sound in court. Judge Helena noticed, seriousness giving way to curiosity. The chirp repeated, louder, and the cage cloth moved. A shiver ran through Ilara. She knew Luro, more than a parrot, a mirror of voices, guardian of secrets. Could it be? A tiny spark of hope ignited in her chest. Mr. Carlos, noticing Ilara's fixed gaze, followed her line of sight. The chirp transformed into an articulated sound, an indistinct babbling, as if the bird struggled to give voice to a memory. The tension increased, curiosity replacing the anxiety of the verdict. Judge Helena, with a firm gesture, signaled for an officer to approach the cage. "What's happening there?" she asked, her voice low but laden with authority. The officer hesitated, then carefully removed the cloth covering Luro. The parrot, with his vibrant green feathers and round eyes, blinked, looking at the room as if waking from a long sleep. He tilted his head, and then with a surprising clarity that made all hearts leap, a voice that was not Ilara's, but that seemed painfully familiar, echoed through the courtroom. "No, Artur, stop! Don't do it!" The words, spoken with palpable urgency and fear, cut the air like a sharp blade. The court held its breath, frozen. The voice, though reproduced by a parrot, was unmistakable. It was Lucas's voice, young and full of dread. Ilara brought her hands to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and overwhelming hope that made her tremble. Mr. Carlos turned pale, his mouth agape in disbelief, while Judge Helena, previously serious, now wore an expression of pure perplexity, her gavel forgotten in her hand. Luro repeated, this time with more force and intensity, Lucas's voice laden with despair. "Artur, please don't!" A sepulchral silence fell over the room, so profound that one could hear their own heart beating. The truth, which Helena had sought so earnestly, began to unfold in a way no one could have predicted, a shocking revelation that shook the foundations of the trial, dispelling the mist of doubt and pointing in a new direction, a turning point. The sepulchral silence that Luro had imposed was broken by a growing murmur, which quickly turned into a deafening buzz. People in the audience began to stand, pointing at the cage, and then at Artur, who was sitting a few rows back, pale as a ghost. His eyes widened in panic, and he tried to shrink into his seat. Donna Ilara, still with her hands over her mouth, felt a strange warmth spread through her chest, a mix of relief and pain from the vivid memory of Lucas's voice. The tears, once of despair, were now of an almost unbearable hope. She looked at Luro, who seemed to have completed his mission, and then at Judge Helena, seeking confirmation that this was real. Judge Helena took a few seconds to process the magnitude of what had just happened. Her face hardened in pure determination. She banged the gavel forcefully, demanding silence. "Order! Order in this court!" her voice echoed, cutting through the buzz. The sound of the gavel brought everyone back to reality. "Officer, detain Mr. Artur immediately," she ordered, pointing to Lucas's brother. Two officers moved quickly towards Artur, who tried to stand and run. But it was too late. He was restrained before he could take more than 2 steps. His arms twisted behind his back as he mumbled something unintelligible, his face red with fury and shame. Mr. Carlos, beside Donna Ilara, was in shock. His mouth opened and closed, wordless. He squeezed her hand, a gesture of silent triumph and solidarity. "Donna Ilara?" He spoke, he whispered, still disbelieving. Ilara merely nodded, tears streaming freely. But now they were tears that washed away the pain of injustice. The truth, after all, had found its voice. in such an unexpected way that it defied all logic. Judge Helena watched Artur being escorted out of the room. She knew that moment would be remembered in the court's history. With a deep sigh, she addressed the jury, who were as astonished as the rest of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, in light of the new and extraordinary evidence presented, the court declares an immediate recess. Mr. Artur will be detained for questioning, and a new investigation will be opened. Donna Elara, you are dismissed for now." Her voice, though formal, contained a note of deep emotion. She looked at Elara, a small, almost imperceptible smile appearing on her lips. Justice, she thought, truly has its own ways. Donna Elara felt her legs give way again, but this time from an overwhelming relief. Mr. Carlos supported her, and together they watched the room slowly empty. The weight of months of anguish and accusation seemed to dissipate into the air, replaced by a lightness she hadn't felt in a long time. She looked at Luro's cage, which was now silent again, as if he knew his part in the drama was over. "My Luro," she whispered, immense affection in her voice. He was not just a pet, he was living proof that truth could transcend the most unexpected barriers, finding an echo even in the most improbable of messengers. That day, which began as the end, had transformed into a new beginning, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and truth's ability to manifest. That day, which began as the end, had transformed into a new beginning, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and truth's ability to manifest. Donna Elara, supported by Mr. Carlos, felt the fresh air outside the courthouse like a long-denied embrace. The sunlight, once obscured by the fog of despair, now seemed brighter, more welcoming. She took a deep breath, and the smell of wet earth from a nearby flower bed brought a pang of longing for her own garden, but also a promise of return. Her legs still trembled, but no longer from fear, but from a deep weariness and a relief that seemed to flood every cell of her body. She looked at Mr. Carlos, her eyes tear-filled with gratitude. He, with a gentle smile, squeezed her hand. "The truth always finds a way, Donna Elara. I told you so." Judge Helena, observing from her office window, saw Elara and her lawyer walk away. A sigh escaped her lips, a mix of exhaustion and deep satisfaction. That case, which had tormented her for weeks, now took an unexpected but just turn. The image of Artur being led away, the panic in his eyes, was still vivid in her mind. Justice, she reflected, was not just about laws and evidence, but also about the ability to hear what lies beyond the obvious, to allow the truth to manifest in extraordinary ways. She felt a weight off her shoulders, the premonition of a terrible error dispelled. The Parrot Luro, still in the courtroom, was being carefully taken away by an officer, under the supervision of an animal specialist. Judge Helena knew that Luro would be a key piece in the new investigation, a mute yet eloquent testimony of Lucas's last words. In the car, on the way home, Donna Elara held Luro's cage, now without the cloth. The parrot, who seemed to have exhausted his strength with the revelation, was quiet, nestled on his perch. She stroked his feathers with a trembling finger. "My Luro, my savior," she whispered, and a solitary tear streamed down, this time without pain, but with immense love. Mr. Carlos drove in silence, respecting her moment. He thought of the strength of that fragile woman who had endured so much, and the incredible turn of events that a small bird had brought about. The connection between Elara and Lucas, and the proof that love and friendship can transcend even death, was something that would touch him forever. Upon arriving at Elara's small house, the garden seemed greener, the flowers more vibrant. The smell of her home, of her memories, enveloped her like a familiar embrace. She got out of the car with Mr. Carlos's help, her eyes fixed on the door. Entering there now was no longer a return to a prison of sadness, but to a sanctuary of peace. The path to healing would be long, she knew, but the first and most difficult step had been taken. The truth had been revealed, and with it, hope was reborn, promising a future where Lucas's memory could be honored without the shadow of injustice. She looked at Lauro, who blinked, as if understanding. Their silence was one of deep understanding, of a battle won and a new chapter opening, full of challenges, but also of a renewed faith in life. Their silence was one of deep understanding, of a battle won and a new chapter opening, full of challenges, but also of a renewed faith in life. Donna Ilara, with Mr. Carlos's gentle help, sat in her favorite armchair, her body exhausted, but her spirit beginning to breathe. The parrot in his cage seemed to observe her with a silent wisdom, his round, curious eyes fixed on her. Mr. Carlos placed Lauro's cage on a nearby table, ensuring the bird had water and food. He knew that Lauro's presence was a balm for Ilara's soul. "You need to rest, Donna Ilara. It's been a very long day," he said, his voice soft. Laden with concern and affection, Ilara merely nodded, a deep sigh escaping her lips. The smell of her home, of her old books and the dried flowers she kept, was a perfume of home that seemed to heal invisible wounds. She closed her eyes, allowing the images of the courtroom, of the shock of the relief to mingle and settle. Lucas's voice, echoing in the courtroom through Lauro, still resonated in her ears. It was a bittersweet melody, proof of the truth, but also a painful reminder of the loss. Meanwhile, in the darkness of his temporary cell, Arthur felt the weight of the world collapsing on him. The panic of being discovered, the public shame, the contained fury at having been unmasked by a mere bird. His mind spun in a whirlwind of regret and anger, unable to accept the cruel irony of fate. He had underestimated the power of truth, and it had found him in the green feathers of a parrot. At that very instant, in the tranquility of her chambers, Judge Helena reviewed the initial reports of Arthur's detention. The investigation team was already in the field, following the new leads that Lauro's unusual testimony had revealed. She felt a professional and personal satisfaction. Justice, at times, required patience and an open mind for the unexpected. She thought of Donna Ilara, of the elderly woman's dignity and resilience, and felt a deep respect. The judicial system, with all its flaws, had been able to correct an imminent error thanks to a series of extraordinary events. The truth, she reflected, does not bend to conveniences or appearances. It simply is, waiting for the right moment to manifest. Back in her home, Donna Ilara opened her eyes and looked at Lauro. "You were so brave, my friend," she whispered, feeling an overflowing love for the small creature. Mr. Carlos, sitting in a nearby chair, watched her with a tender gaze. "Now, Donna Ilara, it's time to start rebuilding. You have many people who love and support you." Ilara smiled, a faint but genuine smile that hadn't appeared on her face for months. She knew the journey would be long. The pain of Lucas's loss was still there, deep and real. But the shadow of injustice had been lifted. She could finally mourn Lucas without the burden of guilt, honor his memory with the truth. The garden, once a refuge of sadness, now called to her with the promise of renewal. The flowers waited for her hands, the earth for her touch. She felt that Lucas somehow was there, smiling at her, proud of the voice he had found in Lauro. Their connection, which seemed to have been interrupted, had been strengthened by the truth, proving that true love never fades. She felt small, but no longer fragile, but strong, with a new hope blossoming in her heart, ready to embrace the future. She felt small, but no longer fragile, but strong, with a new hope blossoming in her heart, ready to embrace the future. The days that followed that courtroom whirlwind were strangely calm for Donna Ilara, a calm that succeeded the storm. Mr. Carlos, with his tireless dedication, ensured she had all the necessary support. He helped her organize the first visits from neighbors and friends, who, previously hesitant and full of doubts, now approached with looks of regret and affection. Many apologized, their voices choked for having doubted her kindness and the purity of her heart. Ilara, with the serenity that innocence had granted her, merely smiled and nodded, understanding the fragility of human faith in the face of appearances and unfounded accusations. Lauro, her faithful companion, seemed to have regained his enthusiasm. He chattered more, repeating random phrases that Ilara and Lucas used to say, but never again the voice of dread that had shocked the court. It was as if the parrot knew his mission was accomplished and could now return to being just the cheerful confidant and friend. Ilara spent hours talking to him, telling him about the garden she planned to revitalize, about the new seeds she would buy, and about the joy of finally being able to mourn Lucas without the weight of guilt. With each word exchanged, she felt a knot unraveling in her chest, a wound slowly beginning to heal and close. In Ilara's house, the aroma of chamomile tea and homemade cookies began to replace the smell of mold and sadness, filling every corner with a comforting warmth. Her neighbor, Donna Marta, who once looked at her with suspicion, now brought fresh flowers and helped tidy the house, chatting about pleasantries and good memories of Lucas. The human connection, which seemed to have broken, was being rewoven, thread by thread, with the patience and delicacy of someone rebuilding a bridge. Ilara felt loved and valued, a feeling she thought she had lost forever. Meanwhile, Judge Helena closely followed the unfolding of the new investigation. Artur, confronted with the irrefutable evidence and the recording of Lucas's voice, had confessed. Envy and resentment for the affection Lucas received from Ilara and the inheritance he considered his by right had corroded his soul. Helena felt a mix of sadness for the family tragedy and gratitude for how the truth had come to light. She knew that Donna Ilara's case would be a milestone in her career, a constant reminder that justice is more than written law. It is the tireless pursuit of truth, even if it reveals itself in unexpected ways. One sunny day, Ilara decided to go to the garden. With the help of Donna Marta and Mr. Carlos, who insisted on accompanying her, she began to remove the weeds. The earth once neglected seemed thirsty for her touch. She felt the softness of the earth beneath her fingers, the smell of life emanating from it. Each movement was an act of healing, a step towards renewal. She planted new seeds, imagining the colorful flowers that would bloom, a symbol of her own resurrection. Mr. Carlos observed her with admiration. Ilara's physical fragility contrasted with the strength of her spirit. He knew that the journey would still have its challenges, for the pain of Lucas's loss would never completely disappear. But now, Ilara had the truth by her side and a community that finally saw her as the kind and altruistic woman she had always been. That garden, which one day had witnessed pure friendship and a cruel crime, now became the stage of new hope, where Lucas's memory would be eternally celebrated, not by tragedy, but by the love sown. That garden, which one day had witnessed pure friendship and a cruel crime, now became the stage of new hope, where Lucas's memory would be eternally celebrated, not by tragedy, but by the love sown. In the days that followed, Donna Ilara dedicated herself to the garden with a renewed passion. Every flower planted, every weed removed, was an act of affection, a silent conversation with Lucas. Mr. Carlos continued to visit her, no longer as a lawyer, but as a friend, bringing seedlings and tools and sharing pleasant stories. Donna Marta, with her contagious energy, organized the neighbors, who came in small groups, offering help, bringing teas and cakes, and filling Ilara's house with laughter and conversations that had long been absent. The garden, once a tangle of painful memories, flourished under the collective touch. Vibrant roses, daisies dancing in the wind, and the sweet scent of jasmine began to fill the space. In a corner, under the shade of an old mango tree, the neighbors, at Donna Marta's suggestion, began to build a small wooden bench. "So you can sit and talk with Lucas, Donna Ilara," Donna Marta said, her eyes tear-filled as she smoothed the rustic wood. Ilara touched the bench, feeling the rough texture and the warmth of solidarity. A tear streamed down her face, but it was a tear of gratitude, not despair. Luro, in his nearby cage, observed everything with his curious eyes, occasionally letting out a soft chirp, as if approving the initiative. Judge Helena, in her chambers, received a report on the progress of Arta's investigation. He had been formally charged, and the evidence, corroborated by the parrot's testimony and his own confession, was irrefutable. She felt a knot of relief unraveling in her chest. Justice had been served, and the truth, however hidden, had emerged surprisingly. She thought of Donna Ilara, of the dignity with which the elderly woman had faced adversity, and of how the community, initially skeptical, now united in support. That case would be a constant reminder that the law was not just a set of rules, but an instrument to protect the innocent and restore faith in humanity. One day, Donna Marta suggested a small gathering in the garden, a way to inaugurate the bench and celebrate Lucas's memory. Ilara hesitated. The idea of a public event still scared her, but Mr. Carlos encouraged her. "It's not a trial, Donna Ilara. It's a celebration of love and truth. Lucas would be happy." Ilara looked at Loro, who blinked. She took a deep breath, feeling a renewed strength. It was time to embrace life, not hide from it. On the day of the small ceremony, the garden was radiant. Neighbors, friends, and even some court officials who had been touched by the story were present. The scent of flowers mingled with the aroma of coffee and cake. Ilara, wearing a simple dress and a serene smile, sat on the newly installed bench. Beside her, Mr. Carlos and Donna Marta. She looked at the faces around her, seeing affection, regret, and a deep human connection. It was the climax of her journey of overcoming, a moment where pain transformed into hope. With a choked but firm voice, Ilara spoke. I just want to thank all of you for being here, for helping me see that life goes on and that Lucas's love, it never left." She paused, her eyes tear-filled. "Loro, my friend, showed us that the truth always finds a way, and you showed me that kindness and compassion do too." She looked up at the sky, a ray of sunshine illuminating her face. "Lucas, my dear, this garden is for you. It's for the love we sowed and that will never die." A murmur of emotion ran through the small crowd. It was a moment of collective healing, forgiveness, and a new promise. That garden now was a sanctuary of hope, a living testament that even after the darkest storms, life blooms again, stronger and more beautiful. The murmur of emotion that ran through the garden after Donna Ilara's words transformed into a collective embrace. Neighbors and friends approached, some with tears in their eyes, others with gentle smiles, all extending their hands to touch hers, to express their affection and the relief they felt at seeing her reborn. Donna Ilara felt each touch as a balm, a confirmation that she was no longer alone. The weight of loneliness and injustice had completely dissipated, replaced by a lightness that made her feel as if she were floating. She looked at Mr. Carlos, who nodded with a proud smile, and at Donna Marta, who hugged her tightly, whispering words of affection. Laro, from his cage, let out a joyful chirp, as if celebrating the new atmosphere. He was no longer the messenger of tragedy, but the guardian of truth, a living link to Lucas and to hope. Ilara stroked him with a trembling finger, feeling the softness of his feathers and gratitude overflowing in her heart. The parrot blinked, and in that instant Ilara knew that Lucas somehow was there, present in the joy, the unity, and the love that filled her garden. The days that followed were of a gentle and constant reconstruction. Donna Ilara's garden became a meeting point, a refuge of peace where laughter and conversations flowed freely. The flowers, now exuberant, seemed to reflect Ilara's soul, resilient, vibrant, and full of life. Neighborhood children came to play near Lucas's bench, and Ilara watched them with an affection she hadn't felt in a long time, telling stories of the young neighbor who loved nature so much. The memory of Lucas was no longer an open wound, but a sweet presence, a reminder of enduring love. In the tranquility of her chambers, Judge Helena received confirmation of Arthur's sentence. Justice, though late and painful for the family, had been served. She leafed through the documents, but her mind was on Donna Ilara. That case had changed her perspective on law and on life. The fragility of an elderly woman, the loyalty of a parrot, the power of truth. All of this had taught her that compassion and openness to the unexpected were as crucial as codes and precedents. She felt a deep respect for Ilara, a woman who, even in the face of the cruelest adversity, had maintained her dignity and faith. Mr. Carlos continued to be a constant presence in Ilara's life, no longer as her lawyer, but as a loyal friend. He helped her with groceries, took her to doctor's appointments, and often just sat with her in the garden, enjoying the comfortable silence and the beauty of the flowers. Donna Ilara, in turn, began to weave small gifts for the neighbors, embroidering flowers and birds on dishcloths and towels, a gesture of gratitude that further strengthened community ties. She felt that she had returned to living, not just existing. The pain of Lucas's loss would never completely disappear, but now it was a pain permeated with love and gratitude, not bitterness. She had overcome the nightmare, not alone, but with the help of friends, justice, and a small parrot who, with his unexpected voice, had restored her faith in life. The future, once an abyss of uncertainties, now presented itself as an illuminated path, full of small joys and the promise that love, truth, and human connection are the greatest forces that exist. Ilara, sitting on her bench in the garden, with Lauro on her shoulder, watched the sunset, a serene smile on her lips, her heart at peace. Ilara, sitting on her bench in the garden, with Lauro on her shoulder, watched the sunset, a serene smile on her lips, her heart at peace. The orange and purple hues painted the sky, reflecting in the petals of the roses that now bloomed with vigor. Lauro, in a gesture of affection, rubbed his head against Ilara's cheek, a living reminder of the journey they had traveled together. It was no longer the heavy silence of sadness that hung over the garden, but a stillness filled with the melody of birds and the whisper of the wind among the leaves, each sound a note of gratitude. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Donna Ilara's garden, once a sanctuary of pain, flourished as a testament to resilience. The flowers she and Lucas had planted together and the new ones the community had helped sow grew side by side, a vibrant mosaic of colors and aromas. The bench under the mango tree was not just a memorial to Lucas, but a gathering point, a place where stories were shared, laughter echoed, and tears of longing mingled with those of joy. Ilara, with her quiet wisdom, became a central figure in the neighborhood, a beacon of hope and forgiveness. Children still came to play, and she, with a renewed sparkle in her eyes, told them about the magic of nature and the importance of always seeking the truth. Mr. Carlos, faithful as ever, continued his visits, bringing not legal documents, but exotic seeds for the garden and poetry books for Ilara. Their friendship had deepened, built on mutual respect and admiration for her strength of spirit. Donna Marta, tireless, organized small teas in the garden, where neighbors gathered to celebrate life, friendship, and Lucas's memory. The community, which had once distanced itself, now united around Ilara, weaving a network of support and affection that enveloped her in a warm embrace. She no longer felt fragile, but strengthened by the human connection that had been restored. During that same period, Judge Helena, observing the outcome of Arthur's case, felt a deep satisfaction. The conviction of the true culprit had been a painful but necessary process, and the truth, so strangely revealed, had prevailed. She knew that Donna Ilara's case would be remembered for a long time in the annals of justice, an example of how life, in its complexity, can surprise us with the manifestation of truth coming from the most unexpected places. The experience had made her a more human judge, more attentive to the whispers of intuition and the strength of invisible connections. Ilara, as time passed, found a new way to honor Lucas. She began to write not a diary of her pain, but a book of stories about the garden, about the improbable friendship between an elderly woman and a young man, and about the parrot who spoke the truth. Her words were simple but laden with emotion, a legacy of love and overcoming that she ardently wished to share with the world. Lauro, always by her side, was her inspiration, her silent co-author. He still repeated phrases from Lucas, but now they were sweet memories, not echoes of a nightmare, filling the air with the sweetness of longing and hope. Donna Ilara's life was living proof that justice, compassion, and truth, however tested, always find a way to flourish. She had lost much, but gained even more. The rediscovery of faith in herself, in humanity, and in the capacity to love and be loved. Her garden, her home, her heart, everything was at peace. The sunset faded, and the first stars dotted the sky. Ilara closed her eyes, breathing deeply the scent of jasmine. Lucas, she knew, was in every flower, in every laugh, in every ray of sunshine, and Lauro, her faithful friend, was the eternal voice of a love that would never die. The journey had been long and arduous, but the destination was a safe harbor, full of hope and the promise that, even in the greatest adversities, the light of truth and love always prevails. The journey had been long and arduous, but the destination was a safe harbor, full of hope and the promise that even in the greatest adversities, the light of truth and love always prevails. And so Donna Ilara found herself not at an end, but at a new and serene beginning. Months stretched into years, and life in the small neighborhood flourished around Ilara's house, which had become an epicenter of kindness and wisdom. Her garden, now a spectacle of colors and fragrances, was an open invitation to peace, a living testament to Lucas's memory and the resilience of a spirit. The book Ilara began to write, with the patient help of Mr. Carlos, who lovingly transcribed her words, became a little gem. The Parrot Who Told the Truth was a simple yet deeply touching account of improbable friendship, suffered injustice, and the surprising revelation that changed everything. The pages, filled with vivid descriptions of the garden's flowers and conversations with Lauro, spoke directly to the heart. The book did not become a worldwide bestseller, but it found its way into community libraries and small book clubs, especially among elderly women who saw themselves reflected in Ilara's silent strength. Every letter she received from readers expressing gratitude and inspiration was a balm for her soul, reaffirming that her story had a greater purpose. Lauro, always by her side, was the silent star of the garden gatherings. He still uttered phrases from Lucas, but now they were like sweet melodies, memories that warmed Ilara's heart and those of her neighbors. The children, who once saw him as a curious animal, now treated him with reverence, whispering to him as if he were an ancient sage. Ilara, watching them, felt a deep joy. Lucas's memory was no longer a shadow, but a light that guided and inspired. Judge Helena, years later, still found herself thinking about Donna Ilara's case. It had become a milestone in her career, a constant reminder that the law, however rigorous, must always seek truth with a heart open to compassion and the unexpected. She retired with the certainty that she had made a difference, and Ilara's story was the most eloquent proof of that. Mr. Carlos and Dona Marta remained Ilara's inseparable friends. They were the pillars of her world, sharing teas, laughter, and the comfortable quietude of those who know each other deeply. The bench under the mango tree, now covered with a patina of time, was Ilara's favorite spot to watch the sunset, with Lauro nestled on her shoulder. She felt the gentle breeze on her face, the smell of wet earth, and the warmth of the friendship that enveloped her. The loneliness which had once consumed her was now a distant memory. Ilara had found not only peace, but a renewed purpose. Her life, once marked by tragedy, transformed into a beacon of hope. Showing that truth, justice, and love are indomitable forces. She smiled, a smile that reached her eyes, reflecting the serenity of a soul that had traversed darkness and emerged stronger, wiser, and infinitely more loved. The garden, her home, and her heart were in full and eternal spring.